All right. Well, hi, hello, and welcome, everybody. I'm super excited to be here for you today and really looking forward to the opportunity to connect with some friendly faces. Hey, Brett. Hey, Chris. Chris, how's it going, guys? I think I
Good.
saw Troy in here too. Beautiful. Well, gentlemen, we've got a special treat for you today. Today, we have Commander Nilsson in the house. And I had the opportunity to connect with Commander Nilsson a couple of months ago now. And I just really was inspired by his energy, his enthusiasm. And I think that we shared a lot of our similar philosophies. And so I'm super excited to have a conversation. He's been gracious enough to meet us here today, and really looking forward to connecting with you today, Commander. Thanks so
Well,
much for
thanks,
being
Matt.
here.
I'm really happy to be here with all of you. It's meetings like this where I think we can all leave edified and grow a little bit in our own sphere of influence.
Absolutely, 100%. And just while I think of it, guys, these kinds of conversations are always a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit more engaging when you guys are involved. And so if you guys have questions or you guys have comments, feel free to raise your hand with a little emoji there and ask a question, or throw it in the chat and we'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on that and get to that when we can. Sound cool, guys? Right on. Well, so for those of you who don't know, Commander Nilsson is a commander in the U.S. Navy. Okay, he's got over 20 plus years of experience in leadership. He's a family man, a husband, a father, an outdoorsman, a sailor, and obviously a leader extraordinaire. And so today we're going to be talking about everything leadership as it relates to personal and professionalism. And I'm hoping that today's going to be a great opportunity to connect, and I'm sure that we'll all learn something. So, Commander Nelson, I'm of the belief that anytime that you're in a leadership position, the first person that you got to lead is yourself. And I would be curious to know, like, one, if you would agree with that statement, and two, what are some of the habits or the practices that you've developed to hold yourself accountable or to make sure that, you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk, so to speak?
Matt, that's perfect to start with. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement that we as men must lead ourselves first and foremost before we can be effective at all in leading in our families or in the workplace or our community organizations or anything we belong with. If we're not showing up and leading in our own lives, then we are not going to be effective in any other situation we find ourselves in. So there are five areas that I like to focus on. Matt shared a little bit about my past and what I'm doing now. Uh, I'm currently in a great position within the Navy where I get the opportunity to lead a team that trains all of our new officers going out into the fleet. So we bring them through this training program, and in the very beginning, I stand in front of every single one of them and let them know that I am most interested in them being able to look inside themselves and determine what are those things that they bring to the table in order to lead. And as we go through that conversation, there are five areas that I think we have to take into consideration. Number one being we have to have connections.
Hmm.
We have got to make connections with those people in life that are going to help us be our best selves and show up. Uh, Jim Rohn, a wonderful motivational speaker and author, has said, "You are the product of the five people you spend the most time with." And I firmly believe that. I believe that those that we surround ourselves with and those that we connect with are those that we are going to become like. And so we really need to have those connections. Two is we've got to focus on faith. You've got to have some sort of meditation, some sort of practice where you can step out of those stressful situations you find yourself in, whether that's in your family, in your profession, in anything else. You've got to have routinely be able to step out and check in with
Hmm.
yourself and say, hey, where am I? Am I really showing up as I should be? Have I wronged anyone? Are there things that I need to change about me going forward? that I can do better the next week or the next period that I'm looking at. Number three is I call it a triad because it's sleep, fitness, and nutrition. If we aren't focusing on ourselves being healthy, then that's going to affect the way we show up and lead. So getting adequate sleep, that's going to be different for you than it is for me. You may thrive on 6 hours of sleep a night, and I may have to have 8, or I just won't be me. And eating healthy, you know what that is. You know that when you're going out and partying too much, when you're eating too much cake and ice cream, you're not your best self. And so keeping those things in check and understanding what your body needs is a huge part of being able to show up as a leader. And then, finally, your fitness routine. I know what works for me, and that's been developed over time. I know that I have to have a good split of cardio and anaerobic exercise, which is lifting, resistance training. So you got to figure that out, for yourself. Are you a cardio, a fast twitchy guy, or do you need those resistance, things in your life too?
Right.
And another thing, I guess the next number 4, journaling. I'm a firm believer in writing things down. A lot of folks will call that a gratitude journal. They'll say, hey, take some time at the end of the day, and I know Matt's a fan of this, to write down those things that have been good for you, things you want to refer back to, or things you might want to share with others at times. But take time to record those events that you need to record there. So, those are really the things that I like to focus on in being able to show up as a leader in my family, at work, and in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I saw it was kind of a Zen diagram a while back that really resonated with me. And it was a bunch of spheres. And it started with the center sphere being yourself. And I think this might have been a John C. Maxwell in one of his like classic books. And it started with leadership being the center is yourself. And, first you got to lead yourself. And then the further and further out you go, it was like your family was next. Your workplace was next. And then your community, your region, your country, and then the world. But at the core of it, it comes back to ourself, setting standards for ourselves and holding us accountable to things that we say that we want to do and things that we say that we want to follow through on. And sometimes that's half the battle. You know what I mean? But if you can't do that consistently, how the heck can you ever expect to lead anybody else? Is kind of my take on it. But, you mentioned number 2 there. I think you said faith. Is that correct?
That's correct. Faith, meditative practices. Right.
Okay, beautiful. It's really interesting. I've done an exercise with a lot of clients over the years called a wellness wheel. And if you're not familiar with a wellness wheel, you can think of it a little bit like the tire on a bicycle. And it's represented by 8 different spokes. Okay. And in all the different sections, they're, equally important, and they're all interrelated to one another. And each of the different sections is meant to represent a major area of your life. Okay. And when I ask new clients, or when I ask potential prospects, like, what do you think are some of the major areas of your life, or the components that make up a great life? Often right off the top of their head, it's things like, well, my work and career, my finances, my family, my health. But after that, it starts to get, the responses start to kind of like wane. And it's really interesting because I've noticed that faith is almost either the last one that's ever mentioned, some sort of like sense of spirituality, or it's completely forgotten altogether. And so I think oftentimes the people are either, I don't know, obviously that's a loaded word, brings with it a lot of like, kind of preconceived perceptions or notions. But what's your like, favorite way to, I think you said kind of check out and check in or step out and check in? Any practices or any specific tools that you use to do that?
Yes, and I could go on for a while on this one.
Cool.
So the when I think of this and I talk to my students about it, I usually open it with, I really don't care what type of religion you are. I
Right.
don't care if you have a belief in God. I don't care if you don't. But we all need that opportunity to be able to step out and check in with ourselves. And a lot of practices are take that once a week and be able to say, where am I at and how am I doing? Now, I talked with a gentleman just this last week who said, I'm so glad you brought this up, because he said over the last year, he and his wife had decided to take a hike every Sunday.
Yeah.
And that in that last year, that hike has been absolutely powerful for their relationship. And he is showing up better as a husband because he's taking that time with his wife. They hike and they don't stop until they get to the top of something.
Cool.
So they either make it to a peak or they make it to the end of a trailhead or something where they can then pause and take that time to just sit and not think about anything, any pressures of life, not think about the stress they may be under in their own family, in their work, in anything like that, but they just sit. And often I've found in life when I do that, I can really focus and I can, and the things that I need to really be in tune to come to my mind.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth?
It's very powerful.
It's things like that that are so simple
Yeah.
and yet so powerful. And you kind of gave me chills just as you're describing that, because it's physical, it's mental, but it's an emotional experience too. And if you've ever spent time near the ocean or in the mountains or in the forest, like what I'm talking about. And I have a similar type of practice, and it's maybe not quite as official as this couple that you're talking about, but I've developed a habit of going down to the ocean a number of times during the week, because I feel like that kind of thing is very therapeutic to a certain extent, but specifically on Sundays. And sometimes I kind of see that as my connection to somewhat of a higher power. And if any of you follow me online, sometimes I'll post a picture or a video and I'll, a little caption that says, Sunday service in session. Because for me, it's connecting with something that's greater than myself. And when you're out in nature, you realize pretty quickly how small and insignificant you really are, because
Yeah.
nature is a powerful beast, and it can be very awe-inspiring, can't it?
I think you hit it on the head there, Matt, because that's exactly the point I really want to see people get to, is understanding that we are insignificant in the whole grand scheme of things and that we're part of something so much bigger than ourselves. And whether that be life in general, or whether that be, in my case, part of the US Navy, or within my own family, I'm just one small piece. And in
Right.
order for me to be effective and to really play my part, I've got to look after myself. And that's one way of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a really interesting point here, and I'd be curious to know, when you have new recruits that come into the Navy, what are some of the biggest challenges that they face? Do you think that that would be physically demanding feats? Do you think it would be learning to kind of like let go of the ego to a certain extent? I mean, you'll have to forgive me because most of my experience with the military comes from the movies. Okay. But I
Uh-huh.
would think that to a large extent, you have to let go of that part of your identity. And you assume, like you said, that you're a small part of a larger whole. And that's probably true for the universe, but also the military as well. Would you agree?
Oh, I completely agree with you. We're doing this at a really good time right now, because I just less than 30 minutes ago stepped away from a final exercise that we do with our each class that comes through. And the exercise is it's called the finishing exercise, and or FinX. So as the students go through this, they are pushed to the limit physically, and they're
That
pushed
sounds
to the
brutal.
limit emotionally and mentally. And as I get to be right at the end, and as they go through this exercise, it takes about 3 hours to get through. You see that,
Mm.
and I get to talk to them about, what were the challenges. And some of the students will tell me, I didn't think I was going to make it across that pull up bar, or that pull up evolution where we have them do pull ups, something physical.
Right.
Others will say, I couldn't get it through my head that I was going to be able to get to the next evolution. And it was more of a mental block where they looked out and they could see where they needed to get to go, but mentally did not know how they were going to get there. And what the goal is that the students come together as a team and realize
Okay.
it's not about each one of them. You
Mhm.
can't do it alone. And it's not meant to ever be done alone. But unless the leader of that group really takes charge and has supportive teammates that's going to get that team through, it's not going to happen. But you have to have a leader stand up, take charge, and assign the tasks that need to be assigned in order to move through that evolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's.
I say that it depends on the individual.
Mm.
There are certainly things that are physically demanding that some of our students blow right through.
Mm.
The physical part of this is just not a challenge. Others, it's a very much a challenge.
Mm.
But to those that the physical part may not be a challenge, emotionally or mentally, at the end, they're drained,
Yeah, I can see
and,
that.
and they find.
I'm really inspired by a lot of, these people that you see sometimes on social media or who have become recent authors like David Goggins or Jocko Willink, who have spent time in the Navy SEALs. And, because that's a real representation of a lot of that mental toughness. Of course, there's like
Very
physical
much.
feats involved, but it's not necessarily the strongest person physically, the strongest or the fastest that are the most successful. It's the people who have developed those mental calluses
Right.
and that perseverance, that persistence, and maybe even to a certain extent that grit that are the
Mm-hmm.
ones that really succeed in the long run. And there's actually a wonderful book. I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with it, but it's titled Grit by a woman named Angela Duckworth.
Mm-hmm.
And she looks at a number of the common factors that are, successful people have in common. And she looked at different places like Princeton University. I believe she looked in the Navy. She also looked at West Point and things like that, who are in and of itself elite level people just to be there, as a part of that group. And some people succeeded and others didn't. And she started to look at like, what's the common denominator here? And she found that that's grit. It's your willingness and your ability to stick with challenges longer than anyone else. Out of curiosity, you mentioned becoming a part of a team, but are there other things that you feel would help a person develop grit or perseverance like that?
Yeah, I love the fact you brought up Jocko Willink and his organization Echelon Front.
Hmm.
He's doing great work. He has certainly been able to take those lessons he learned, in the Navy, and put a team together and go out and really make a lot of organizations better because of that. I'm a huge fan of something that he teaches, and you'll see over and over again in his book Extreme Ownership, and that is we need hard things.
Right.
We need to be always looking for what's the next challenge. What if we're just sliding by and we're going through life and we're looking for the next ride, then we're not developing, and we're not getting any better whatsoever. So we need to be putting ourselves through one challenge to the next and embracing those. And when we embrace those challenges, that's when we see the growth.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's where we get better. That's where we get sharper. That's where we get stronger is in the mud, huh?
That's it. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
In the thick of it.
In the thick of it. Yeah, for sure. Um, Out of curiosity, do you feel like the skills and the attributes and some of the like qualities that make you a leader in the Navy transfer over to home life and family, or do you find resistance, with that sort of thing?
I that's an interesting one because I think as a husband and father, uh, each of our family dynamics are going to be different,
Sure.
and no matter what, we try to do, everybody has to figure that out. I think in their own family of what's the dynamic I'm getting into today, and sometimes that changes by the day. You
Isn't
know,
that the truth? Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But the lessons that I think we can learn, and that the military has taught me, is that you have to be agile. You've
Mm.
got to have some agility and be flexible.
Yeah.
So just in this last week, I just had a guest speaker come to my class yesterday. A great mentor of mine. His name is Mark Broker from Broker Leadership Solutions. He came in and he said, one of the things that that he has observed in organizations all over the country is that when leaders are willing to be up and around and out and about,
Mm.
organizations tend to be high performing
Mm.
or termed high reliable organizations.
Mm.
And we in the military have adopted a lot of those practices as well. Uh, but he said, those leaders that we see that sit around, that
Mm.
come into the organization and they go to the office and they sit at the desk and they lead by email,
Lead by
to
email.
not have the organizations that are highly reliable. But the leaders that come in and spend their time with their people
Mm-hmm.
and walk the halls or are on, we call the deck plates, walking around and not just checking in and asking their people, how are you today? How's the work going? What can I do to support you? But actually listening.
Mm.
So listening to their employees, listening to those that are also there working to accomplish the mission that the organization has. And he said, what you'll find is when you can take something as a leader that an employee gives you, go out and actually accomplish that, or bring something back to that employee who asked you the question or asked for the support, all of a sudden you've now just tripled the trust,
Right.
and or more so in you as a leader. So I would say, let me bring that right back to my family. If I'm a husband and a father
Mm-hmm.
that comes home at the end of the day and plops myself on the couch and turns on Sports Center or whatever else I'm interested in, and sits right down, eats my dinner on the couch, and sits there for the next 2 or 3 hours, the kids during that time go to bed, how effective am I? Not
Right.
at all.
Not at all.
But if I can bring that right home and say, and come home and display the energy at home that I just had at work, I'll tell you what, it's going to pay huge dividends in the way that family runs.
Yeah, I love that response. And it kind of goes right back to what you had mentioned there at the beginning was as far as connection.
Very true. Very true.
And I think that, and Brett and I have talked about this quite a bit in the sense that, in life, whatever you want, first you need to be willing to give it away. And I think that it applies, to respect. If you want respect from others, first you got to be willing to respect other people. You can't just walk into a room and demand the type of respect that you want from other people. You got to be willing to give. And same with love. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you want more love in your life, first you got to be willing to show up and be loving. You
True.
know, it's the law of reciprocity to a certain extent. And I think that it probably applies with leadership too. And like you said, those leaders that just, mail it in might not be as effective as the people who are out there who are, hand in hand or arm in arm and with their team and checking in and building those connections and building that trust too. So yeah, I appreciate that. Chris, I see Chris has a hand up.
Morning, guys.
Morning.
With your conversation going back to grit, I find for myself, I got to bite off more than I can chew. And I got to get to that uncomfortable state where my career is super uncomfortable and it's on the edge for me to really perform at my best. And I can't do it where I actually think about it. I actually have to just go out and do it. Because if I overthink it, I talk myself out of doing it. Where if I just go to my job and I just do it and not think about what I'm going to go do, I find it's super uncomfortable during that moment. But once it's done, I can actually give myself that recognition that, hey, man, yeah, that was scary. And that was more than you were willing to take on, but you got through it and you got through it well. So that uncomfortable state that we talked about before, that's huge. Like I'm actually currently working in one of the most hostile environments in the aviation world right now, doing things at 7,000 feet on glaciers, building drills that there's nobody wanted to do the job. And I just went and did it. Like, I don't want to overthink it. I don't want to, put myself in that mental state where I'm going to talk myself out of doing it. But it really humbles you at the end of the day when you decompress and you go over your day and you think about things. It's so true that you have to take on that uncomfortable state to really strive to get into the next level. In saying that, also, where you guys talk about being the leaders from an office, I've been promoted on those jobs to go sit in the office and be the chief pilot and be the operations manager of these companies. I was horrible. I was not, comfortable being there because that's not my style of leadership. My style of leadership is actually going out and physically doing it, not delegating somebody else to go do it. And that's where I really, I take less money being in the cockpit flying the aircraft than I do sitting in an office, but I'm happier and I can lead by my skill set and my comfort level. Do you guys also find that with your careers and your jobs where you really got to bite off that uncomfortable piece and kind of choke it down to get to that next level?
I'll let you handle that question there, Commander.
Okay. Chris, no, I appreciate that. And I just wrote down a couple of things I want to make sure I hit while I respond to you right here. First off, kudos to you, because I think too many guys that I deal with are just staying in the career that they're in because that's what they chose. And they know that in order to get their retirement or, put food on the table every day, they've just got to stick it out. And to a certain extent, I just don't think that's what life's all about.
100%.
I think we're here to use our talents, skills, and abilities in order to make the best life we can for ourselves, our families, and then those that we're leading, in the workplace. So kudos to you for recognizing that you just weren't cut out for those roles and that you're being authentic and you're out there doing the job that you enjoy. Now, as far as getting uncomfortable, I'm being uncomfortable. Yes, I stand by everything I've said so far. I think we've got to be uncomfortable. I have had roles in the Navy where I've been extremely uncomfortable, and where things that I think back on now, of I am not exactly sure how we did that.
Yep.
I'm really not sure how I brought my team through that entire evolution, and we got to where we got. But I'll tell you, being a leader is, again, it's not just about you. You are one of many people. You're one of however many you've got on your team. And if the leader understands that and goes to their team and says, hey, I need every one of you. Every one of you offers something right here. And
Yep.
I need us all to work on this. Well, you accomplish a lot. You accomplish buy-in from the team because they see that their leader is asking them to have some stake in the game and not just follow what the leader's putting out. So that's huge for me is making sure that the team feels supported and that I'm listening to them and having them develop the plan. When we go now, going back to you and talking about the role that you're playing right now in the cockpit and being in really tough situations, 7,000 feet on glaciers, right there. There's a certain extent that I would think you feel exhilarated at the end of every day, right?
Oh yeah.
You got it.
Yeah. Like for me, it was understanding who I am and actually accepting that I am a very, very type A personality. And it took me a long time to really actually truly honestly accept it and not fight it and not think that I was egotistical. That's who I am. That's what God built me as. I just have to accept who I am and use it for a strength, not a weakness, and not think that I'm being arrogant or I'm being cocky. It's confidence. And I fail more times than I succeed, but those failures, like I'm teaching my 10-year-old son, fail stands for first attempt in learning. And I tell him that every day. Like, you did not fail, son. It was your first attempt in learning. That's it. So it was a lesson. You gained something, so you didn't fail. Let's move on. And finding a career is different than having a job. And I tell these young guys in the mentorship program that I've created is you will never work a day in your life in your career, but you'll work your ass off in a job. So when you go to a career that you actually love and you cherish, I've been doing this 24 years this year. I love my job. It's a career that I've chosen and it chose me. And once I accepted it and trained and took the good and the bad and worked through it, I love it. I get to see things and do things that, people dream of. And Matt's seen some of the photos that I share that he's just like, you can see his face. It's just like, wow, where are you? How did you get there? It's mind boggling. And that's the downfall I find is I take that for granted because I see so many rad things through the world that I forget that very few get to actually experience those things as well. So it's nice that I can share that with social media and friends and family, because then they humble me to bring me back to that reality of, hey man, do you realize where you are? Do you realize what you're doing? Not everybody gets to see and do that.
Yeah.
True. Yeah, I agree.
Chris, you've got a pretty amazing career there for sure. And I am super inspired by some of the photos and some of the stories that you've shared up until this point. And, I think that, Commander Nilsson and I share that philosophy. And I imagine most of you guys would as well, as far as I think that life to a large extent is about learning, growing, creating and recreating yourself. But it's a perpetual process of evolution, in my opinion. And a lot of that baked right into that formula requires us to put ourselves in those difficult situations or in those challenges, and those struggles, whether they're, willingly, as a product of myself and my own decisions or otherwise. But I think that for the most part, a lot of people will do everything that they can to avoid those kinds of situations. And, back to your point there earlier, I think that sometimes people they'll find themselves in a comfy job where they're showing up, they're mailing it in, they're 9 to 5, they're collecting their, the paycheck and that sort of thing. And I heard a phrase one time that I think is really appropriate here. And it says that the 3 most addictive things in the world are sugar, heroin, and a monthly paycheck. And I think that sometimes it's like putting yourself in that position where you got to hustle, where you got to grind, where you got to learn, where you got to grow, really does help us to become sharper, stronger, smarter, faster, better as human beings. But everybody's got our own sets of strengths and weaknesses, and what comes easy for Chris might be very different than what comes easy for Brett or Troy or Commander Nilsson. And I find that like the gym, although it can be physically challenging, it's easier for me than doing something like public speaking. And I think that learning to, face some of those challenges and lean into some of my weaknesses to develop those things is also, to a large extent, an individual or, unique to each person, but an opportunity to learn and grow nonetheless. But question for you, Commander, when we're talking about leadership, do you feel that leaders are built, or do you feel like there are natural qualities and characteristics that people are born with that make them better suited to leadership?
I think both are true. I think there are certainly those that are natural leaders, and that based on their personality, based on the way they conduct themselves, yes, there are some traits and some abilities that show through in individuals just naturally. Now, I don't believe that uh, natural leaders are just stagnant. I believe they have to continuously refine. And just like any of the rest of us who are trying to work on our leadership, I believe those natural leaders need to do just what everybody else needs to do in order to refine those skills that they have. Um, we talk a lot about integrity. We
Mm,
talk a lot about accountability and trust, and how those three things are really key and necessary to be an effective leader. If you don't have accountability, trust, and integrity, then you will be hard pressed to have anybody follow you. And those things are only built by showing and by displaying to the people you're leading through specific actions. So I can be a natural leader, and I can see in my own family that, hey, there's a storm coming on Wednesday. And I'm going to stand up and say, family, we need to go outside and we need to clean the toys up in the yard, or we need to bring the patio furniture in, or we need to do these things in order to prepare our house. I'm leading, right? I'm taking a stand and telling my family and explaining to them the reason why we need to do these things. I can do that. Now, if I don't go out with them and do that, I'm not building trust or
mm,
integrity or being accountable. Do you see where I'm going with this?
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, if I go back to what I talked about before, if I'm being a leader that walks around and talks with people, and I hear from one of my employees that they have been working for 30 days to get a light bulb changed
Mm,
in an exam room in the hospital, because my specialty within the Navy is a hospital administrator, and I happen to be in this fun job right now in officer development. But if I'm walking around the hospital and I hear from an employee that they've been working to get these light bulbs changed, and later that afternoon, someone from the facilities department arrives and changes those light bulbs, what do you think that did? That showed those employees that I'm interested in them and they can trust that when
mhm.
they ask me for some help, it's going to get done, or
Right.
I'm going to support them.
Right. I'm really fascinated and interested in the word integrity. And
Mm.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and speaking about it. And, I think that for me, integrity means alignment between your thoughts, your words, and your actions or behaviors.
Mhm.
And I could be wrong here, but I think that integrity is one of the most abused words in the English language, because there's a lot of people, and I oftentimes say there's a very big difference between what people know and what people say and what people actually do. And I'm curious, like, do you think, is it possible to be in an 100% integrity? Because I mean, and the reason I ask this is because I find that there are times in my life where, I do my best to follow through on things that I say I want and things that I say I'm going to do. But I wonder too that, like, you know, sometimes even authenticity or integrity might even stem from the idea that like being able to acknowledge some of your shortcomings and be able to like acknowledge the fact that I'm a human and I make mistakes and I'm only a man. But I guess my question is, do you feel like there is an opportunity or a situation where a person is 100% in integrity, or is that kind of like a moving target where you're always kind of self-correcting?
I believe on the whole, it's a moving target where we're self-correcting. I understanding that we're all human, and there's not a one of us on this earth that are going to be able to every single action do it 100% or be in exact alignment with what someone else might be judging us as it should be done. Now, are there specific actions or very specific situations where we can be 100% in integrity? You bet there are. I can say with my word that I will be at a meeting
Right.
no later than 1300. And then I arrive at that meeting at 12:59. I am in integrity
Right.
because I have performed an action exactly as I said I would do it. And I am 100% in integrity. Now, if I go throughout my day and I have conversations with 15 different people and someone hears something I say and takes it a little bit differently than I may have said it, that person may think that I'm out of integrity
Mm,
when it doesn't happen exactly as they felt I said it.
good point.
Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
But when it's those things that are within my control that I can be very specific with, I believe I can be 100%. But I believe we've got to look through the optic that others are seeing us in. We may not be 100% based on the message that they received
Right.
from
Yeah,
what we said.
that's an interesting point that you raise. And you know, even to your the something that you had said a moment ago about Jocko Willink, and maybe comes back to this idea of extreme ownership.
Mhm.
And you know, I find that one of the great qualities, or one of the qualities of a great leader, is how much praise you give to others when things go well,
Mhm.
and how much blame or heat you take when things go awry. And I think that, you know, being willing to like, you know, take responsibility, or like Jocko says, take ownership, you know,
Mhm.
for, you know, when things go sideways, could maybe lend itself to that word integrity as well, too.
That's
I,
true. I completely agree.
I'd just like to read this little chat here that Brett left in the group chat before he dipped out. But you know, Brett's a great guy, and I think that he brings up a couple of interesting points here. So for anybody watching the replay who isn't able to read the chat here, I want to share this. But Brett said he's got to dip out for a minute. He said, "Commander, it's been a delight listening to you. You remind me of my grandfather. He was USMC, and he taught me a tremendous amount. Lead from the front. Don't ask anyone to do something that you're not willing to do yourself. Make your bed. There's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. Develop a routine. Embrace the suck. Always be capable of extreme violence, but never pick a fight. Never tell a lie. Stay classy, gentlemen." In true Brett Rolston fashion, you know, is a bit of a wordsmith himself, but just wanted to make sure that that was kind of on the record, so to speak.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So a couple more questions here for you, Commander, before I let you run. And if there's anybody else who has any questions or comments, feel free to either raise your hand or throw it in the group chat, and we'll get to it here as we can. But I wondered, you know, when it comes to keeping your cool under pressure situations, you know, in the military and in the Navy and in hospitals, I imagine there's a certain capacity where things could be life or death, you know, and the stakes are high. Do you have any tips or suggestions or strategies on how to train people to either keep their cool or make good decisions in tough situations?
Yeah. In fact, two things come to mind right here.
Okay.
First is there is rarely a situation that requires an immediate response.
Mm.
And even in life and death situations, there is room for a pause.
Mm.
And there's great power in a pause. So I've learned over time that I do not have to immediately respond. Even if I take 5 seconds, that 5 seconds can often be the difference between me laying into someone and taking a breath, getting a little bit cooler than I might have been 5 seconds previous, and being able to address that calmly. Now, second, there are a couple of practices that we teach, and that the Navy has really embraced a program called Warrior Toughness.
Mm.
A couple of those practices are self-talk.
Mm.
Oftentimes, we need to do some mental self-talk, and within our heads, we need to play out how we see this conversation going and rehearse. You can call it mental rehearsal. Rehearse within yourself. How do I really want to respond? And within that mental rehearsal, you can think, what are the repercussions of how I respond to this situation? And oftentimes that's a good practice to embrace, of just think about what are the second and third order effects. If I do this, if I respond this way, what's likely to happen, in the future?
Right.
And then, yeah. And then another one is recalibration. So recalibration for me means taking some deep breaths
Right.
and really sitting quiet in a situation and removing myself just briefly so I can think clearly. Because oftentimes, and Chris, you may have this too in the cockpit, you might be in a situation where within the next 60 seconds, you hold the power to make one of two things happen. Either you are gonna crash that aircraft, or you're gonna be extremely successful in whatever you're accomplishing. So take a few seconds and do some recalibration and think, okay, I do this all the time. I think, okay, Casey, get it together right here. And 5 to 10 seconds later, I'm right back. And I can think a little bit more clearly after I've stepped out and I've come back.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is a book by Viktor Frankl. And if any of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl, he wrote a couple of books, I believe, but one that jumps out at me is Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with Viktor Frankl, I believe he was a Polish man, a psychologist who spent time in a German Nazi concentration camp. And I think that he survived 4 of them, actually, and then later went on to become a speaker and an author. And in that book, he has several great points and insights, but one that always comes to mind is that, between the stimulus and our response, there's a gap. And in that gap is our freedom to choose, and it's our freedom to choose how we respond versus react instinctively. And I don't know about you guys, but anytime I've had a knee-jerk reaction to a situation and I'm reacting emotionally, those kinds of situations rarely end well. I usually say or do something that I later regret. And, to your point there, Commander, sometimes even just taking a few seconds to check in, take a couple of deep breaths and take a step back or pause, like you said, there's power in the pause, to ask myself, how do I really want to respond to this? What's going to be the downstream effects can be the difference between winning and losing.
That's it.
But and it's interesting to hear you say the self-talk plays such an important role for you too. And that's something that I talk a lot about, that I teach a lot about, and that I practice a lot, is taking conscious control of our thinking and that inner dialogue. And I always say, just because you can control your thoughts doesn't mean that most people do control your thoughts or their thoughts.
Mhm.
And that's a skill. Like any other skill, I think you get better at it the more that you do it. And I came across an interesting study recently that I think might interest you guys, but that's that they looked at two different groups, and they looked at one group of people who gave themselves instructional self-talk. You know, when they were looking at sports, it's like be the first to the puck, or, you know, like finish your checks or do whatever it is. Okay. Versus the second group who were more identity-based self-talk or personality type self-talk, like you're a great player, or you're an A-list athlete, or, you know, you're you know, skilled. And that group, that subset, outperformed the instructional self-talk every single time. And I
Mm.
think that even as far as self-talk is concerned, obviously there's empowering self-talk and disempowering self-talk. And I'm sure, you know, if you're a human being walking the face of the earth, you probably have some experience with negative self-talk. But even as far as some of that positive self-talk goes, you know, addressing yourself as like the kind of person that you want to be, or reaffirming the kind of person that you see yourself as and your strengths, can be one of the simplest and yet most powerful things that a person can do in those pressure type of situations. And I love what you
Agreed.
said there about recalibration, just kind of using your mind to, you know, reconnect with your body maybe, and remind yourself to breathe. And it has a inverse relationship too, doesn't it?
It
When you take
does.
control of your thoughts and you take control of your breathing, it slows your heart rate and also clears the mind too, I would
Right.
think. Would you agree?
I do agree.
Beautiful. Well, maybe time for one or two more quick questions. I see Chris has his hand raised, and then we'll want to be respectful of Commander's time here, so we'll let him run at the top of the hour here. But yeah, Chris.
Hey guys, again, you said exactly what we train for every year. We take a human factors course that's mandatory every year, and pilot decision making. And two of the top subjects that reoccur is rhythmatic breathing,
Hmm.
calm yourself down. And the second one is rely on your training. Just, you know what to do. Calm. It's
Mm.
not a situation unless a mechanical failure has happened with the aircraft, you're not going to perish. So take a couple deep breaths, control your emotions, think positive, and rely on your training. And it doesn't matter if I'm driving down the street, I can catch myself, you know, somebody cut me off, take a couple breaths, put your hand back on the steering wheel, not giving them the bird. You know, you're not going to solve anything by aggravating somebody else. Take a couple breaths, smile at them, wave, wish them a good day. It'll change their attitude pretty quickly.
Isn't that the truth, huh? Yeah.
It is.
Um, Commander, maybe one more question before I let you run here. But in prior conversations, you mentioned the term authentic leadership. And just kind of curious, what does that mean to you? And how can somebody, you know, work on becoming either more authentic or a more authentic leader?
What it means to me is that each of us takes a hard look at ourselves, and we determine what is it in me, what is it in each of us that we bring to the table. What knowledge do we have, what skills do we have, and what abilities do we have? If you leave this call and go and try and imitate me,
Mm,
and try to act just as I would act in a situation, I highly doubt you're going to be successful,
mm,
because that's not you. And likewise, if I try and be Matt the rest of the day, it's probably not going to work for me. But what I can do is I can say, I really like what Matt said in our call today. I really need to do a little bit more self-talk. I need to really embrace that. And so I take that principle and I apply it to myself. And how can I do that? How can I exercise that in my life in order to be more effective. So when I talk to my students, I let them know, I expect you to use those talents, knowledge, skills, and abilities that you have in order to be the leader in those areas of your life that you're showing up as a leader. And if you want to really exercise that, you need to first understand leadership is an on the court activity. We don't sit in the stands, but you need to be on the court in exercising leadership. So, the things I mentioned in the beginning of this call, forming connections, making sure that we're remembering and taking time for that those meditative processes, or our faith, journaling, keeping our fitness, sleep, and diet in good line. And then I would say one more thing, and that's read good books. Make sure we're filling our minds with good information. I can sit and I can waste 30 minutes of a day scrolling on social media and not accomplish a darn thing. But I can spend that 30 minutes and I can listen to a podcast and get some great nuggets that I know I can change, about me, or things that I can adopt in my life in order to be a little bit more.
Great point. And they always say that garbage in, garbage out,
That's it.
And we think from our ideas. And so the only question is like, well, where are you getting your ideas from? Where are you getting your inspiration from? Where are you getting your ideas from? And it goes back to that, reading great books and surrounding yourself with inspiring, motivating, uplifting, encouraging people,
True.
Last thought before I let you run here. Speaking of great books, you and I had a conversation a couple of months ago, and I'm curious, when's your book coming out?
Oh, well, it's going to happen. I will tell you that it's going to happen, and I will keep everyone posted. But it's I don't dare say a date at this point, but it's going to, Matt.
Awesome, right on. Well, let you guys in on a little inside joke there. I was just in my first conversation with him. I said, "Man, you seem like such a smart, intelligent, capable leader. I'd love to read a book by you." And encouraged him to maybe write one here in the near future. So I'll be looking out for that. That's for sure.
All right.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. I appreciate you guys showing up on the call. I appreciate the comments and the questions. And most of all, Commander Nilsson, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us today and share some of your insights, some of your knowledge, and some of your experience. And I think that there was a wealth of information there and some real gems. So I appreciate you. And thank you very much for being here today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Matt. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. And I look forward to connecting with you all soon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.